it be a creatively voluntary one.
Yes.
I feel like I'm doing that.
Okay, so then, yes, but then as you go around, you literalize it. Now, I got a picture from you last night
Yeah. Elliot.
while we were watching the last episode of Outlander. And it somehow resembled the last episode of that's series 5. And series 5, she was a remarkable actor, this woman who played in this Outlander series. And she's gone through such despair and hope and beauty and, in it, that it was just our goof. Everyone, we've been all watching it. And she went through such a terrible time in the film in terms of her acting. And then all of a sudden your picture comes on with Elliot and Joan, I believe. I couldn't see the whole picture. But Mary did show me a big picture of Elliot. So I'm saying that basically what we've opened up is a stream of consciousness of experience. And in showing those pictures, I experienced 50 years from an incident. An incident in India then created 50 years somehow, inveigled its way into 50 years of the life that I've had. So for a moment, you introduced a retrospective of that, because the 50 years is also parallel. Some have died, some have lived, some have, but they're parallel then, so there are moments waiting. And it's a kind of milieu that we're moving in. And the milieu is around the energy somehow. And that is somehow the revelation frees the history. Where somehow now a mystery enters into your life. That is more related to luck and accident and chance. And once you start to perceive the mystery being an important part of running through your life, you start to have a different relationship to the literal world. That literalizes a person according to their background, their parents, the running thread of organized continuity. So I'm also saying from my experience that somehow perceptions in the moment freed the story from its literalness. And somehow you saw the everyday living was also a process that you were in. And the process is as familiar as the changing seasons, or today it snowed here, you see, and tomorrow they predict it to be warm again. You see that you're in processes. And that you are yourself a process. A medical process, a physical process, a social process, a literal process. You see, even your mechanism of being is in process. And you see, to the dominant force of the continuity is based on thought and a literal identity. And when there's a literal identity, there's continuity that becomes a prevalent concern. And when anything threatens the continuity or the comfort zone of continuity, whether it be a storm, whether it be a fire, whether it be an attack, whether it be an illness, right? You see that there's a constant management in the psyche around the everyday continuity. When you then contacted Catherine, and Catherine then introduced this idea when we were discussing the virus and vaccinating, whether it was wishful thinking or magical thinking. And I would say we would call many of the Vedantic or Indian texts magical thinking. But I say coming from a clear space where you're no longer dominated by the history or the karma, then it's almost as if you're a director or a screenwriter or a writer where you can employ magical thinking or you can employ wishful thinking you say, let's approach this subject from wishful thinking. You understand? It's not that so you understand that wishful thinking is a premise for those who have logical thinking, that wishful thinking is a way of avoiding getting the vaccine. Because you can't give them a logical framework. When it's more nuanced than that, that is the one language that is spoken. So you exist in and I say, I don't have not doing, and I don't have doing in my mind's eye. I do have somehow creatively the right thing. So I have somehow a promise with my own being that there is an energy that I'm caring for in myself somehow. And that resembles the axiom that I'm in it, but not literally of it. But you can see that the of it will force you to be in it their way. To literalize a movement, okay. But still, that you're coming from a place in yourself, in your being, that then can employ wishful thinking or logical thinking, or it has it utilizes the bed, but it's not dominated by its thinking. The thinking is a tool of expression. But until that is happening and the thinking process itself becomes a dominant factor in relationship to doing, from the perspective of the art of life going into the story, doing is only one part of the expression. But if you don't have that creative pressure beforehand going in, then doing is the prominent movement. And so if if in fact you're reflecting on something and you're seeing it from a different angle, then you see the doers then say, no, doing is, and they're right from their context, if it's continuity that you're talking about. But if you're talking about truly happening for you, that speaks to you clearly, then you see that doing comes out of a clear view. Then you employ the doer. But you see, without that, then the doer is the main person in one's life. You see, it's only when it's deeply interrupted that it then reflects on itself. And I say, I wish I didn't do that. Okay, I would have done it differently, you understand? Mm-hmm. I say, so you see what was missing in the action was that coming from where you're coming from. You see that you're coming from a continuity that repeats itself. And so much of the doing is addictive oriented. So then it has its logic that it needs to do. But if in fact you see the photos that you showed and this and that, you just saw a remarkably different group of people somehow connecting for a couple of days, for a couple of months, for a couple of years, and interacting, and yet being very different. And something united them for a moment. And I feel that coming out of that experience, people have made a life for themselves, but they're also expressing. So if we do meet or don't meet in time, there is that our relationship is coming out of that experience that we've shared. Whatever the difference in expression, whether the person is a scientist or the person is a mother or a father now, or whatever their expression, they didn't have those expressions when we met. They assumed those expressions. So somehow it has the meaning in it, or the feeling in it, or a little bit of the energy that then goes into the story. When it goes into the story that way, where people are coming from the experience, it affects somehow how they're literally going through it. So the premise that we had shared in the last year or so has been more around an immersion around the understanding, prospectively, that living and dying is not death as a future event, but living and dying is inherently in the living form. They have it in science, in physics, that there's a correspondent that is merely particles and heat that form mass. That mass is also disappearing into nothingness. Nothingness is becoming something. And we see in our own living in the photographs, you can see yourself as a kid, you can see yourself now. Is the self you a literal self, or is this thread of you running through all these experiences? So if in fact you see, even through your own photographs, that you are not the literal you, but you somehow, whatever the you is, it's assuming different forms and different shapes towards different experiences. And you see somehow that in seeing that, from the picture of your youth to the present or whatever, you see that somehow it was inherently in the story. And you can then, I remember when this happened and that happened and this shifted, and you see perspective in retrospect. Gives you an aha moment about literally what happened. You get to see your own life, not as your possessive, but a life being lived and a life interacting. And even from that perspective, you can see the energy running through the literal life and how it then found relationship and how it then lost relationship or shifted relationship and how somehow it was inherently in the story. But people may find reasons afterwards why this happened or that happened. But as you view the story from the sacredness of creativity, where you don't own the story, you get a glimpse of something that's hidden in plain sight to most of us. Your own existence from the observer. But now we no longer have the delusion that the observer has to be quiet and has to force themselves to do this. The observer needs to yearn to see it. And if you see that somehow you are a creative element in this story that's unfolding and still unfolding, that is what the attempt was at one point, where everyone had a kind of perception that allowed them to meet from a place that was not driven by the history or by motive. History meaning motive. When in fact we go to a yoga school, there's a motive to continue, and motive maybe to make a buck, maybe a motive to meet a boyfriend or a girlfriend. So you see that it employs the yoga as a form of continuity.
Yeah.
But you also see that there are moments spiritually in one's life where it throws you for a loop. And so one is not bringing the history into the story, but one is bringing, like in making the film together, everyone is then bringing a creative expression to the story. So you see the attempts of governments and structures to force that is not what we're talking about. Even though they recognize that there's a commonality that they're coming through. And even though there is this idea in religion that there will be a collective seeing, And the premise of the collective seeing would be then to invite the Messiah or collective voice. So let's say then that we look, instead of believing in religion or not religion, we see the science of it. It was the science of its time. And they were the ones who were studying existence as the others were living and attempting to live. There were some who were then studying their own existence. So then when I see it as no longer has a belief, that the belief in the system has a motive. But those who are genuinely exploring, even those scientists, whatever form they had to explore, they were not satisfied with the literalness of it. There was a constant where their life itself was an exploration. When one's life itself is an exploration, then the body and the brain start to take on a different shape, where even though it understands logic, it is not dominated by any aspect any more than it's dominated by its 10 fingers. The thumb does something, the pinky does another thing, but none of it owns the story. They're expressions that one has reasoning. Whenever you enter into systemic logic, then reasoning is the prevalence. But coming again from the creative experience into the story, you have different expressions available to you. Is that okay, Derek? Is Derek still there?
Yes.
Yeah, I'm here.
Yeah, because I couldn't. Okay.
That sounds appropriate.
Okay, so then I think the confusion was the attempt to turn it into a literalness. When I'm suggesting that you have the experience of flying over it. And then in your own circumstance, have the experience of flying over it. Where somehow you are not, you get to experience it from a different place. And you see that that different place is in fact the thread that runs through the situation. Now, does that, any of that make sense for you? Yeah. I'm saying that coming into the situation from a genuineness in yourself is coming into the story almost like a director-actor relationship, where somehow the access to the larger picture is not sneakily hidden, is creatively hidden, so that one can genuinely find a way towards the experience. You see that some of the things that we discussed, that we're kidding around, that met my father and the cancer or this or that, you see that some elements of that was utilized by you in your own life while we were discussing it with your family there in San Francisco. And somehow everyone then had their own perspective, where a family then was seen not literally as a family, but the literalness of the family was one aspect of it. You see that, in fact, the family itself was a creative act. And the creative dimensions are kind of hidden from each other. And the literalness of the family carries on. So you have a literal brother and a literal sister and a literal mother and a literal father. But then you see it from the theater, and the eye releases the story from its continuity. And you see that each person somehow had a life. not your description of their life. And so when you see the thread running through it and then you re-enter the story, but you re-enter the story having shared a heartfelt or a true moment of seeing or sharing, somehow it enters into the literal story. And you see the literal story is no longer around only survival or continuity. The other dimensions of the story, when it's perceived to be a creative act, then you understand it's the creative dimension, if it's perceived, will enter into memory. Somehow memory is our access to the mystery. Because there are hidden moments that are revealed in memory. And in the revelation of memory, but usually from the creative aspect, it reveals. From the psychic aspect, it creates more thinking. When thinking is an instrument of continuity, it usually then exists in a kind of stress, because there are hidden events that it knows it's going to run into, or situations, that nothing is fixed. It knows somehow its own frailty. What do you say there?
Sounds right.
So how did you come to have that picture of Elliot and you, and were you in a restaurant last night or something?
Yeah, just to hang out with Elliot and went to get some dinner. And Joan works down there, so she joined us. And
Where does Joan work?
she works in the mission down around 13th and DeBose-ish in
Oh,
that area,
yeah.
working with
And
us.
but you weren't wearing masks.
Oh, right. Yeah. Well, we were in a restaurant. There was nobody in the restaurant either. So they've recently opened up restaurants here in San Francisco. So
Oh, really? And how's Elliot doing then with the virus?
he's okay. He just got his vaccination, his first vaccination. Next one's coming in a couple of weeks. He told me he feels like he's fading. And so I was just sort of hanging with that, sitting with him with that.
You mean naturally?
Yeah.
Okay, not because he's gotten the virus or anything.
No.
Is he still utilizing the LSD?
Yes.
Microdosing, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And now both you and Joan involved still in it?
Joan, not so much. I think she's gotten what she needed out of it. It does something to her physiology that she doesn't really care for. So
Yeah, that may be so. And what about you? You're feeling that it serves a purpose for you?
it, yeah, opens things up in different ways, shows a deeper sense that maybe I wasn't aware of or privy to before. So another sense of what eternal means, maybe, is a way to look at that.
Well, let's see. I say, coming from the space, we could see it in the arts. We could see it in the movie making and theater, that somehow the theater, well, even in Shakespeare, supposedly was the first human, or the first that would then show to people themselves in a mirror effect. So supposedly, according to Bloom, I believe, Shakespeare invented the mind. Because until that premise was that people just naturally were doing what they were doing. They didn't know these underlying premises were there, and thought. And okay. So let's say that somehow the theater was revelatory. And then as they studied it, you had to do something to your historical self for you to be able to honestly portray from the art place another's life. Because then from that perspective, you no longer saw them as literally, you saw them as human beings going through whatever they were going through as part of what they were doing.
Mm-hmm.
So when you showed it in the picture, you saw a build-up to the expression.
Mm-hmm.
So if the person was a killer, we'll say on screen, they show you a history of the killer and what happened to him and why he's this way and what's the intrigue that he's in.
Okay. That sounds good.
So somehow from the audience, we use the axiom where you can cry at the movie is illusion, but to throw your shoe at the villain on the screen is delusion, is to act it out.
Okay. Sweet.
It's to be touched. And you see then generally that the actor is attempting to touch you, to affect you deeply. In reaction, in hope, or to awaken certain dormant elements in you. And you see when there's a retrospect of your own life and you see those photographs, it resembles something like being touched at times or reactive at times, even though it may be 20, 30, 50 years ago or this nothing, and it was immaterial, it was nothing. Somehow it touches or affects. Coming from that place, you understand that your relationship is to create the creative dimension in the story. Do you understand that somehow, once you see that the interaction that you've had with some has forced you to be alone with something where you have to consider this and where you get angry and hopeful or hurtful over nothing but the memory of an experience. Then you kind of go into the songwriting, you go into the filmmaking as if it's second nature to you now. That you've sensitized the system towards the experience. But again, when there is a parallel movement to find out, the motive of finding out affects the situation. Because again, it's the premise of continuity. And there may be certain things that you see that they're symptomatically a reaction to seeing it, but as you explore it deeply, you start to surrender your own viewpoint towards a deeper happening. So then you see in yourself the difference between a viewpoint that allows continuity and certainty, but then you meet in yourself when it's interrupted, a reflection on the certainty, and you see the whole underlying uncertainty that runs through the story. And you start to see your own life as an uncertainty principle running through it. So I feel that we've been discussing in simple experiences where one is thrown into an aspect of the life where it is not that possessive, but it's coming from a different place. So when I use an axiom of at one time when I caught cancer 20 or 30 years ago, I was then going to go to our little home in the Himalayas there. I didn't have a fight with dying from the philosophical framework I was coming from. It was more living falsely. So then Mary's invitation in terms of the energy created a no-brainer, of course. But it was based on a genuine feeling or an invitation. So every now and then I have access then to the energy being the basis of the life. But when there was an invitation, you understood that when the invitation touched you deeply enough, you saw that the idea of choice left. And so you also understand in your own life when there is a kind of true love that's come into your life, it makes you aware to some degree the invitation has enough coarseness to it. At the same time, it's shifting the whole framework that you're in. Because the invitation has made you aware, but you also understand that somehow it waits, that there's an energy that waits. But somehow you're in the story, literally, but you're not of it. The premise of the story that most of us are in, around survival. What are you going to do because the money's not there or something like that? But you also understand that the presence is around something else. That you cannot leave a circumstance unless it's truly so. Not that you're fleeing or scamming or scheming or any trip like that, that somehow. Are we floating too far afield here or? But what I'm saying is the premise of the meeting becomes the possibility of the seeing. But if in fact the premise of the meeting is the continuity of the story, and I say, no, the continuity comes out of something true that you're doing. The continuity is an aspect of the expression. But in the social terms, the continuity of one's life is the primary reason. But if you flash back on your own existence, you see how many forms it's taken, how many expressions it's had. And so when you get access to your own, through memory, to your own story again, you see it resembles a few movies that you've been in more than it resembles a continuity. Whenever you have a perception of your life as a creative act, there's a dimension of the creativity that then enters into the story. So then what is it to re-enter the story where your family now is a creative thing, not only a literal thing that continues? And as you meet them, then you meet the challenges that they've had, or may still have. So do you see what you're doing, Derek?
Mm-hmm.
What's that?
I guess attempting to sidestep something.
Well, let's say in interaction, you're kind of becoming a teacher by your presence. By not organizing anything, but just basically by seeing a bit deeper than the literal. So as you perceptively give the person a life, not only a reaction to the literal thing, you see their journey. So let's say if I see an Elliot, you and a Joan together in the thing, I see the journeys interacting and overlapping. So what then seems to be happening is somehow these three very diverse people are intimate. They share an intimacy as if it's normal. So in their normalcy, they can discuss how their experiences on acid. They can discuss they're having conversations that would almost be scientific to some degree, as if it's a normal occurrence. So then I'm saying that the life is art. You see an artwork unfolding. You see then what would have been impossible for the restaurant. And that old guy was made normal. And all of us have made our. And when I look at the pictures then last week, I see the normal years for me. And the spin-offs and the experiences and how normal it was. If I meet each person in the picture that we've had this experience, even though they were normal people who have children and they have careers and they have this or that. So when I'm meeting folks who then have come out of the experience somewhat and they have the normalcy of their life, and yet when I look at most of the lives, they say, oh, I don't know if I can pull this off, man. I'll try to back up as much as possible. And I say, whether Derek is okay. So they say, why? I say, because there's a few factors going on. Okay. So in that, or Derek, he's going to be able to do this with John and this one, that one, taking the acid. And okay. And I say, why? I say, because he didn't have India. He didn't have this. He didn't have mantras. He didn't have that kind of experience or whatever. They came from a pretty straight framework into the story. Okay. So then I see each person's situation to be remarkably creative challenge over nothing. But you see that the format that we have created is to have that common perception. And somehow a premise of creatively re-entering this, assuming identity, no longer being dominated by a historical identity. But you see that, in fact, you have assumed different identities throughout your lifetime, given the creative circumstance that you were in. You were you throughout the story, but you see the different identities and you see the different cultures that you moved in. And you see the remarkable juggling act where one culture could never have possibly understood the other culture that you were in. But somehow there's a hipness that runs through your expression now. Because you've experienced a creative life where you were accepted by other creative people just naturally by being you. And then you see that you may step into a straight situation, but it's still creative for you, for the things that you have to do and pull in order to keep your integrity going. So I say there's a perception that happens where one sees at the same time one is living the day-to-day, one also has access to the creative dimensions of their life. And in the creative dimensions of their life, there's a kind of integrity that is not the integrity of the social fabric so much, but it's the integrity of being human. That somehow you have agreed to be human in the story. Your attraction is that you're human, and the anger with you may be that you're human. Because then your presence is having an effect on the circumstance. And so then you also understand that those who love you around you will then take up aspects of that, where they're also inherently wanting that integrity in the story. So you see, then your presence may then force others, because there's a duality happening of continuity of the persona, and there is also something of a feeling of love, of surrender of that. So in the premise of your presence is kind of demanding a kind of true thing. And that's not laid out, but false is. So if you start to see a conspiracy coming your way, what's the conspiracy going to be? That you are a rat bastard, sneaky, creepy person. Right? And that's coming from rat bastard, creepy person and accuses. So when a rat bastard, creepy person accuses you of being a rat bastard, creepy person, it's a very weird experience. Yeah, it's like Trump accusing you of, or someone who's outrageously self-centered, then accuses you of a whiff of that. Do you want the job, Derek?
Okay.
So then you're able to manage the normalcy of Elliot and Joan and yourself in San Francisco with the virus and John in the background and this. What's the philosophy again?
There's a lime in the coconut.
I say the closest we come to it is that the perception frees the energy. The aha moment, hidden in plain sight, but once your life is starting to be, and creative means that somehow once you've taken up a spiritual aspect of your existence, then accidents happen. And the accidents reveal the continuity. And when you see then that there's a continuity without the feeling, the story finishes for you in that moment. It's like having a love affair that you walk in and something is betrayed. There doesn't literally have to be betrayed, but the thread is lost. And once the thread is lost, there's lag time where the situation starts to dissolve. Then you kind of understand the science of something where there is an incident reveals, and once it reveals, the continuity is upset. And the continuity had a logic. You needed to pay the rent, you needed to give, you didn't have enough money. So that's the logic that prevails in the continuity. But once the event reveals a loss of the creative contact, then the form that one is in will start to dissolve in time. Sometimes in the moment, it's over. So then what happens is that you see then the living and dying inherently in every form. And it doesn't mean death. Death may be falling out of love. Or betrayal happens where it interrupts the naive feeling that allowed it to carry on. But something interrupts the continuity. And you see then the elements in the continuity then seek a different expression. So one becomes aware of almost an everyday life having a different kind of science or art running through it. That everything that is existing is also dissolving simultaneously. That continuity can't be without also a dissolution simultaneously taking place. You start to meet forces that exist. So then I say, from that perspective, you re-enter the story from a different place, where the survival sense is no longer the dominant force. But the survival is an aspect of a creative thing that's happening. If the creative thing is not happening, then the survival running the story creates repression and suppression, because there is a yearning in each being to be free, to see, to be truly and deeply involved in their life. So I would, well, where are you with your idea that you had of making some formula? I would release it to some degree and let it evolve. What do you say?
It'd be nice to have access to more photographs across maybe many other people too. Might be interesting.
As I'm passing away, you mean? Well, I mean, I am seeing passing away as the norm. It may literalize with this happening or that happening, but at the same time, that's the fact for me, is that I'm seeing it not so much from literal, but looking into the story. So when I say living and dying, I think that different sciences or different approaches have seen living and dying in the everyday. We presume, we take it for granted. If you leave some food on the counter too long, it'll die in a day or two, or it'll go bad. Or if you walk out in the backyard, you'll see trees that are dying and some that are taking bloom. And so you see that it's normal, that living and dying is there in the seasons, in the circumstance, in your own body, in your life, in your memory of others. You can see them when they were living, and you can see maybe their experiences when they were dying. And you can see that sometimes when you were seeing them living, they were dying. And in retrospect, you may even see those friends who have died, that now you see that you then have access to see, aha, they were dying for a while before they died. So although it looked like it died as a momentary thing, you see that dying was inherently in the story. Now that dying is probably, it's seemingly necessary in nature. But you also see that any approach to it is wrought with fear. And the premise then of the social fabric is to continue living. And so that seems to suppress dying or make dying into some kind of projection of what happens in death. They don't call it dying, but they call it death. But I'm saying that from the creative perspective, the perception of living and dying as natural, not morbidity, is inherently a shift in your own brain to a creative dimension. Because then you can see from the creative dimension, from the writing or the creating or producing, you see the living and dying as the art of the life. And you see the self's relative sense of it throughout its life. So even though everyone knows this or that, when it actually happens, it comes as a shock to the system. I'm saying this because I think today they approved this right to die law here in New Mexico. Assisted dying if in fact the doctor feels that you're too far gone or whatever, but they've just approved that. And the church was really angry. And then someone said to the church, look, if you don't want assistance, then that's cool. But if somebody does want assistance, why lay your religion on them? So why could it be a free choice that the people have? If you have a system of belief, that's fine. And they say, well, the system of belief believes that the anguish in every aspect of it is part of the experience. And so there is a resistance to it becoming taken away, the human aspect of it taken away. So I would say, Derek, that the doer in the circumstance can, unless something comes to you, a flash in the night, but around the actual literally doing of something.
Okay.
Because you'll see that everyone will have a different aspect of the journey that they're in.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm saying, when I say to you, can one employ wishful thinking or magical thinking when it's not, when it's warranted creatively? And so then when I read the certain, let me see, there's a book called here called Ka, Stories of the Mind and Gods of India. And you see that there was almost a science that they had there, where each of the gods represented an energy or an expression. And so they were attempting to see what literally was happening in their own lives by having some premise of gods going through the same thing, going through a literal life of living together and this and that, and then trying to have an example of a reflection. How is Elliot? Is his health okay?
He's okay. He does seem like he's slowing down a little bit.
Yeah. Well, he's an old geezer now, isn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Getting up there.
Is anyone else on here, or is just the three of us?
Urge here.
Urja's here?
You can't see me?
Oh, there, I can see. Oh, there's Alfred that just wrote here. Let's see. Hello?
Anybody on YouTube, say hi if you're here.
Oh, hi, I'm on YouTube. I'm having a conversation here with a few folks. Okay. So Alfred may come on. Remember, that's the fellow who had the face of the last time there. What was the? So he's the shaman up there in Taos, and I think he worked with some around music too. He released the music of Paul Simon. He worked with Paul Simon, I think, at an early record or something, and then a few other people, maybe Sting or something, where somehow he allowed them to access themselves a bit, you know. How are you, Urja?
I'm all right, Danny.
Are you feeling anything further from the virus, or you feel that you have it now managed?
Yeah, I mean, old age is showing signs, you know, but I can't see that it feels that I'm healed from the virus.
Yeah, so it does seem that you're going through what normally you go through.
Yes.
Well, which is enough to go through. You don't need to.
Very much so. Yes.
Well, you know, it's interesting that folks who do yoga and these other forms may also have the same form that you have of pain coming in the circumstance. I've been really doing this club dance exercise with the eyes and smelling and hearing, but also from a kind of just relaxed space, where it's not so much a athletic proposition of doing, but it is more, it's not so do-oriented, the exercising. It's more a natural flexibility. And I think you tried to do that with the techniques that you were involved in.
The gyrokinesis, yes.
What do you think? But still, we're passing away, no?
Oh, yes, yes.
You
That's
can wave at hi.
that's on the agenda.
Which agenda? If you can, did you see that series Outlander? It's tough.
I've seen I think the first 2 seasons.
Yes, you found there was too much. I mean, it can be corny and dumb and violent or whatever, but there's one woman who plays the main character is so good in
Yes.
her role. And we got saw the last one of the 5th season, which is not generally available.
Mhm.
And she went through such a torment, just as she was about to experience a supreme beauty. And her vision coming true, all of it, because she knew what was going to happen. When she went back in time, she knew what was happening, that there was an explosion about to happen, the world they were about to. So she willingly went into what you would call wishful thinking as her existence.
Mhm.
Or magical thinking, but she was kind of the only one conscious in the story.
Mm.
Hmm?
That's
So
interesting.
she saw the links and time and measure, and so so at the end it was so the kind of humiliation they put her through at the end, and then coming out of it and so on, and so it was very interesting. So we're free of it now. We're just finished with completely. But I have to say that her acting was remarkable
Yeah.
in it. Anyone else on then?
Well, we have some people on YouTube. We have Britt and Henry and Sophia, and I don't know, it says 12 people are watching, but only 3 have said hi.
Okay, is there any questions at all?
Anybody have any questions on YouTube for Danny? Danny, when you talk about there's the moment when the situation is freed, but then there's the time. I don't really know what my question is, but obviously I'm in the time zone.
Yes.
42. Is that like no man's land, or what is zone?
What does it mean? Well, it means that your body is quickly shifting to a new expression. So let's say we can see, even growing up, that there's inherent movements in our body that dictate much of what is happening. So you could see that the body at one point is based to reproduce itself. And that starts to happen in your youth at a certain time, that your body starts getting ready then to recreate, to have children, to recreate its form. And that becomes the norm in the society. And so then that becomes the expectation to some degree in the social framework, that you will then do this, you will have family, you will have continuity, you'll have children. So then the premise of continuity is taken as a premise from your body. But then you see that there's also systemically reactions to being dominated by a historical framework in your body. And a desire then to be a free person in some way, meaning not have a historical telling you what to do. So then you see the social movements, the upheavals that take place, the different identities, and the different identities around sexuality being defining who you are. But then you see, as one goes into a spiritual life or a yogic life and starts to explore, then you interrupted the identification with history and even with sexuality being who you are. And to some degree, you enter into a zone where falling in love is the primary experience. Then you can assume the identity from the love affair. You say, well, hold it, that has always been guarded against. Because then the love affair allows you then, falling in love then allows you to assume the expression. You see that sexuality is only an aspect of your expression, not you. And so then you start to explore a world when the identity is not so formulated as continuity. You start to explore a world of sensuality. And you see the organized world of sexuality is to avoid sensuality and to continue to. So then you have dating games around the continuity of something. But if you see in your own life that falling in love opened up a doorway of possibilities. So from the perspective of the energy being freed from its history, then the age is only an experiential part of an experience that's waiting for you. So where literally the aging process defines you in the social framework, the aging process for the creative being allows you entree into a place that was hidden from you. Because now you're in it and you can see what you were missing. So I'm saying once that premise of assuming the identity happens for you, then you see that there are certain experiences that are waiting for you to have that perception of something that's happened. Does that make any sense at all, Shursha? Let's say you had to get to 81 to see something.
Yes. Not part of it.
But that somehow the 81 doesn't, may make you old in body and circumstance, but you see that somehow you've assumed that this experience.
Yes.
And as you look around you, you see others that are in the similar neighborhood of experiences for you. So you then see that somehow you're a teacher or an advisor or a helper.
I cook for people.
While you're having similar experiences yourself, you see that you then become a helper to those who are captured in the experience.
Yes. Yes.
And so your relationship then is by your presence is having those that you're alive while you're alive. And that the circumstance that you're in while you're alive is the play that you're in.
Yes.
But somehow you inhabit a consciousness in relationship to what has happened. And so somehow that consciousness allows you to know that you're assuming an identity towards an experience. You see that you're still caring for something.
Oh, yes.
And you also see that you're still looking for a boyfriend. Even at 100 years old, you're still looking. It doesn't have to be a boyfriend, but we'll call it boyfriend because that's the most naive description for it. But or like we'll say like Jesus had a girlfriend and she wasn't exactly a girlfriend, and Mary Magdalene, let's say, but she represented a soulful energy. So let's say that you're still, not in terms of still for this long, but that somehow your life has been around the dialogue, an internal dialogue that becomes an expression outwardly. And so you see accidental meetings or meetings with people or things that happen. You see to some extent your daughter living the life that you've lived. So she's originally living it. You can give her perspectives to some degree, but you can't interfere in her experiences. So you know, as in your life, that there's a pursuit of the broken heart.
Yeah.
That anyone could have advised you, don't do this, but you saw that you were going to sneak out the window in the nighttime to have the experience no matter what. So then you see the parallel world was the experiential world for you. That somehow it had to be true in some way. There was some element that ran through you. So what looked like a dopey thing or this thing or that, you see in retrospect the brilliance of the move. And you see the love affair or the pursuit of the love affair, you see is in fact a relationship to the mystery running through the story. And anytime the literal story that you were in smothered that feeling, you saw that the mind was finding a way out of it.
Yeah.
So I think then the 42-year-old Kai is a very unique experience.
Yes.
There's not many books on it.
52.
Understand? But it is uniquely your own creation, where somehow to some you're deeply spiritual, soulful, and to others you're a little ball buster. Okay. But you see that the very same thing that you're soulful for is also what you're a ball buster for.
That's true.
So this is the weirdness. The very thing that they would come to you in terms of soul searching or reflection in trusting you would be the very thing that they would punish you for, because the doer is not such a big deal in the exploratory life. So you'll understand that the philosophical framework is more where you're coming from, what the motive is in doing or not doing. It loses itself in the question, should you do this or shouldn't you do that? As if the doer is that powerful. When in fact you see that something in the creative life, it has to speak to you in a way, that there's an invitation, creative invitation hidden in the story. So when I use the example of a Mary saying, hey, baby, would one come back from dying if someone loved you and said, hey, baby, why don't you hang around for a while? And I say, I think so, however dumb it sounds. Let's say I'm going, oh, I'll see you later. And then someone says, hey, baby, why don't you hang around for a while? I say, okay.
Yeah, I would do it for this one.
Okay. So let's say, hey, baby, if it comes from the heart, leaves you choiceless in a way. What pictures? Did you make any pictures today?
Well, she wanted to show you her hair.
Yeah, her hair. Who did it?
Oh,
Hey,
See, it's purple and pink.
I got it dyed today.
oh, that's cool.
Okay.
How did you do that?
Beautiful.
Yeah, it looks pretty nice.
Dyed by Karen.
That's pretty nice.
Daddy's girlfriend is a haircut.
That looks, Mary? Oh, no one's here. I was going to show Mary your hair.
Yeah.
That looks pretty good. What about, why don't you dye your hair, Erja?
Me? I thought of it.
For your birthday? What colors can you get? What colors can you get?
Oh, I think you can get
You can
pink.
get pretty much anything you want. These are just like vegan natural dyes too. They're
Oh, that's pretty good. And I was looking at, is it Billie Eilish?
yeah, she likes Billie Eilish, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, she's pretty good. I was looking at her the other day, and she dyes her hair not that color though.
She dyes her hair blue and black
Yeah.
and green.
You thinking of doing that too? No. It's
I'm
better with the
thinking
natural.
about the blue hair might be nice. The full head blue hair might be nice, but I don't know about the green and black.
What do they use? You use flowers?
It's
What
like
are you
a,
using for color? But
it's
there's
like a,
Mary.
it's
Should
like a
she dye
vegan,
her hair? Yeah.
vegan natural
Oh,
dye.
yeah.
I don't know what they make
That's-
it out of. but-
That's beautiful.
Yeah. You
Wow.
like
There you go.
So cool.
that? Yeah, that
Go
is
out
pretty
to
cool.
the camera.
Look like feathers.
You
Yeah.
want to try it?
Maybe.
You want to ask her the colors?
Kind of looks blue in the lighting.
No, ask her
The bird
Which-
girl.
The purple,
What colors did you use?
purple and pink, but it looks
Purple and pink.
the lighting
Looks
makes
navy blue.
It does. It's the lighting.
Purple and pink.
Or
it's
Beautiful.
you go.
Oh,
Chloe.
yeah.
the,
Whoa, that is cool.
I got an ombre.
Very nice.
Ombre.
Hombres looks good.
Okay.
Well
that's pretty
done.
nice. Want to show them Ray?
Sure, come here, Ray.
Yeah, show them Ray.
Come here. Whoops. Watch your head. Come here.
Are they about to?
Yeah, show Ray the color.
Oh,
Ray wants to see the color of your hair. Ray, Ray.
Do you like it, Ray?
I think he does. I think he's liking it.
It's a pink and purple ombre.
I might try it on Ray.
I'm pointing to Ray. It's a pink.
it's
I just
adorable.
booped his nose. I just booped.
I know.
His nose over the camera.
You shorty.
He's
Okay, we may. Who's still on? Is Derek still on?
yeah, Derek. Marcia.
I'm here.
We've got a very small screen today. Is that okay, Derek? That we'll just let it be up in the air for a moment.
Yep.
Okay, did Elliot have any indication that he wanted to connect?
Yeah. So we set another day to have for him to come out here and maybe sit by the ocean.
See more pink at the back.
So,
Okay, we have a very little, my computer is down here.
Oh, yes?
Yeah, so I'm using Mary's small tablet. So I only get a small picture of what's happening here.
I can
But
help.
again, what we were talking about is coming from a common place where one can look at the life from that feeling creatively. And then you get an insight into the continuum to some degree. That's why I say that if there was a philosophy in the situation, it was that you see that your life is organized into continuing. And so therefore, the continuity squeezes out much of what else is happening in life. So it's only in memory and retrospect that you see another dimension of something that may have happened that you took for granted it happened in your own idea of what happened. So when you see another dimension, then you're seeing somehow the other person's point of view or what they brought into the story. When you see the other dimension, not only literally what happened and your viewpoint, but you then see that your viewpoint is only an aspect of what happened. And when it's revealed in time, these other dimensions were happening parallel. But you also see not only, you see an avoidance inherent in the life towards continuity. And that sometimes in its avoidance, it will then be beset by thinking in the nighttime or something about something that it's avoiding.
Mhm.
So you see the thinking process is in fact happening with this, where it's avoidance, structure, continuity, or whatever. But then there's a moment of insight. And you see that thinking is attempting to get out of the insight towards continuity, so it causes stress.
Oh, yeah.
When thinking is the dominant factor of survival, then it has to repress and suppress much of what is happening. So it interprets events according to its continuity. When a moment happens, it sends it back. You see then that the life doesn't belong to you, only one aspect. That the you is more of an Uber driver taking you, but that there is an energy of you that is closer to you than the literal identity. Whenever you then have contact with a deeper element in yourself, you start to see that that enters into your literal story. At that point in time, you see that from the perspective of freely seeing, you become religious without a religion.
Mm-hmm.
That you're inherent, you see the basis, the origins of the religion, but then you see the organizing principle was around the continuity. But if in fact it's coming from the original experience, then you see that you have more, how weird it is, you have more of a relationship with Buddha than Buddhism. You have more relationship with Jesus than Christianity. Because you see then that that's the historical interpretation of the continuity. But once you have the Buddha perception, and that simply meant meeting Buddha on the side of the road and having a conversation where you interrupted what you were doing. And you saw another dimension hidden in plain sight. Once you have an immersive in that experience, that enters into the expression with you, the life with you. So then seeing the thing from another perspective, you see that doing or not doing are not the only questions that are happening. But that's the trick of the story. That somehow you have to organize your feelings into a literal situation to be known. When you see that, in fact, what you're doing in the expression is more an aha experience, a waking up of the story, not a continuity of the story, not how to get it better, to make more money or to look, but a kind of genuineness in one's life. And you see that that genuineness assumes identity towards a creative or a human expression. Well, I hope that makes some sense, but we were just trying to create, just in simple terms, I feel that the perception of something, an accidental seeing of something in memory or in the past or whatever, releases the energy from its continuity. And so once the energy is released from its continuity, you see that a creative dimension was simultaneously happening. And if in fact you see that much of that living and dying is inherently in every form, then you re-enter the story and you see that living and dying is in the decisions that people are making, the structure, the politics, the literalness of it all has living and dying in it. And that all of life has living and dying in it. And living and dying doesn't mean death. It means life itself. And you see even in yourself that in the living and dying, you see there's a carrying on in friendship and memory, where it's not literally owned by the body or the experience. But you see the memory, even the memory today of what we have in sharing for a moment will bring us a laugh an hour later or something when you think of something. But I remember the color of her hair. So you see that that is more of life than the self, the memory, the things that are inherently waiting in the circumstance, even the descriptions of the immune system that are going out there and how it's juggling the health of the life. It sounds more like the soul of a circumstance where it's managing living and dying somehow. So I feel that this is what our exchange is. At the same time that it's normal everyday living, it also has inherently a journey in it that we've all shared. And so when you showed the pictures, but I think that most of the pictures are on my website, aren't they?
Mhm.
And all the generations of experience and so on, I think are there.
Castro.org, I think.
Yeah, or In That Stillness. It's also that has that name. In That Stillness is the name of the book that I put together there.
Same
And what a
website.
time that was.
Same website though? You don't have two websites, do you?
I think it is that In That Stillness also. It's the same one.
Oh.
You know, but it has different pictures and situations there of. And you can also see in the pictures the flowing past it, where an incident may change the picture, where the necessary next space, where something, an event interrupts or something explodes or this or happens or whatever, you see the interruption of the continuity. Then you see the next meeting, if it happens in the form, comes from a different place. In memory may come, or reflection may come. So then you start to see that the relationship has memory in it, not so much literalness. But it does say that when we meet again, that there's no trip. And it's not spelled out, but it is spelled out if you were making a movie together. You understand that you're kind of asking for a similar feeling, not forcing a similar feeling, but that creatively you understand that we're sharing something deeply. And that as we're talking to an Urja, or we're talking to a Jai or myself or others, we're living and dying, obviously, in the story. And so in your perception, living and dying may mean death, but you see that living and dying are obviously in the story. And so then you see that if I bring, we lost you?
We lost you.
Yeah.
We can't see you, Danny. I can't see you.
You can hear it?
Yes, hear you, but
Okay.
not.
So you could see that the attempt to, you could see the continuity in the form. And you can see then the attempt then to be able to see what the self doesn't want to see. The self doesn't want its continuity interrupted. But you see that there's an event between us that causes a kind of reflection that shifts the plane. You see that your life was a movie. In some way, that your life was a creative act. Once it is kind of freed from its history and its continuity, you see that memory is a creative tool. Because memory then allows you to see the I and thou of existence, that the other existed. And when that happens, the self surrenders to some degree to, you see, it surrenders to the life itself as a creative act. And that one was the caretaker of it. Okay, I'm losing you pretty completely here, but it says low battery and it's going to close.
Okay. Okay.
Okay, I hope I'll see some of you tomorrow night.
Thank you so much, Danny.
Yes.
Thank you, everybody on
care.
YouTube watching. We'll be back next week, probably.
Okay, then I'll see you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ah,
Oh,
you're
there's
back.
Urja.
You just-
You came
you just
back
came
again.
back.
That's weird. I just touched it, said touch it, and I touched it, and it's came back. So I'm still, I don't know what I have here. Oh, this is a tablet. Okay. How do I turn it off, though?
Well, I can end the meeting. Are we leaving? Okay. Bye.
Bye-bye.